In 2020, a historian examining a 1902 photograph from the St. Jude's Asylum for the Forsaken made a horrifying discovery. While digitizing the image of a group of orphans, facial recognition software revealed that one of the children in the photo was not an orphan at all. In fact, he was the son of a wealthy industrialist who had been declared dead 3 years before the photograph was taken. Dr. Samuel Hartley was a digital archivist who spent his days preserving history one scan at a time. He worked in a basement office surrounded by boxes of old documents and photographs waiting to be saved from decay. That morning, in October, he had started work on a new collection the museum had recently acquired from St. Jude's Asylum for the Forsaken. The asylum had closed its doors in 1987 after operating for more than a century. Now its records were finally being made public. The photograph that would change everything seemed ordinary at first. It showed 20 children standing in 3 neat rows outside a stern brick building. The sepia tones had faded over time, but the faces were still clear. Boys and girls between the ages of 6 and 14 stared at the camera with blank expressions. None of them smiled. Their clothes were clean but simple, the same gray uniforms that marked them as wards of the state. The date written on the back read September 15, 1902. Samuel scanned the photograph at the highest resolution his equipment allowed. He then ran it through a genealogical software program his department had been testing. The program was designed to cross-reference faces in historical photos with existing records to help identify unknown subjects. It had successfully matched dozens of people in other photographs to census records and family trees. But when it analyzed this particular orphan photo, something strange happened. The software flagged one boy's face with an error message Samuel had never seen before. The screen displayed the words "Temporal Paradox Detected" in red letters. The system had identified the boy in the second row, third from the left, as Theodore Blackwood. According to the database, Theodore was the only son of steel magnate William Blackwood. But that was impossible. Theodore Blackwood had vanished during a family trip to the mountains in August 1899. He had been declared dead after a 3-month search that made headlines across the country. Samuel pulled up the old newspaper articles from 1899. The story was heartbreaking. 7-year-old Theodore had wandered away from his family's campsite and never returned. Hundreds of volunteers had searched the wilderness for weeks. The boy's father had offered a reward of $10,000 for any information leading to his son's return. The search ended in November when Theodore's torn coat was found near a river known for its dangerous currents. A judge had issued a death certificate based on the evidence. The entire nation had mourned with the Blackwood family. Yet here was the same boy standing in an orphanage photograph taken 3 years after his supposed death. The facial recognition software was certain of the match. It calculated a 97% probability that the orphan and Theodore Blackwood were the same person. Samuel's professional curiosity turned into an obsession. He needed to understand how this was possible. His first step was to check the asylum's handwritten admission ledgers for 1902. He spent hours going through each entry, looking for any mention of Theodore Blackwood or any boy matching his description. There was nothing. The ledger listed all 20 children from the photograph by name, but none of those names was Theodore Blackwood. The boy who looked exactly like the dead millionaire's son was listed simply as John Smith, admitted January 1902, parents unknown. The discrepancy was not a clerical error. It was an impossibility. Samuel began investigating the asylum's history more carefully. He discovered something interesting in the financial records. After Theodore's death in 1899, William Blackwood had become the primary benefactor of St. Jude's Asylum. His donations had saved the institution from bankruptcy. In 1900 alone, he had given more money to the asylum than all other donors combined. This seemed like the noble gesture of a grieving father trying to help other lost children. But the timing bothered Samuel. He searched through the asylum director's private correspondence from that era. Most of the letters were routine business matters, but then he found a series of messages between the director, a man named Dr. Edmund Carlyle, and William Blackwood. The letters used careful language, but their meaning was clear enough to someone paying attention. They mentioned a special ward that required extra funding. They discussed a sensitive subject that needed absolute discretion. One letter from Blackwood contained a peculiar phrase about the boy who reminds me so of my lost son. The investigation took a darker turn when Samuel uncovered the asylum's medical records. Between 1900 and 1902, he found something disturbing. Several orphan boys had been admitted who shared certain physical characteristics. They were all between 7 and 10 years old. They all had dark hair and gray eyes. They all had similar facial features. Each of these boys had died within months of arrival. The official causes of death were common illnesses like consumption or fever. But Dr. Carlisle's handwritten notes in the margins told a different story. Next to one boy's death record, the director had written that the likeness was insufficient. Another note mentioned that the subject was rejected after evaluation. A third simply said too aggressive, unsuitable for purpose. Samuel realized the asylum was not just housing orphans. It was auditioning look-alikes for a specific, sinister purpose. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but Samuel needed more evidence. He spent weeks searching, through boxes of documents that had never been cataloged. Finally, in a box marked private and confidential, he found what he was looking for. There was a hidden financial ledger that showed monthly payments from William Blackwood to Dr. Carlisle personally. These payments were separate from the official donations to the asylum. Each entry was labeled with a single word: discretion. But the most shocking discovery was a sealed envelope at the bottom of the box. Inside was a second photograph that had never been made public. It showed a single boy dressed in expensive clothes, sitting in what appeared to be a wealthy family's library. The boy looked exactly like the one from the orphaned photograph. On the back of the photo, someone had written a note in neat handwriting. It said, "Proof of life. He is well. Send payment." The date on this second photograph was December 1901, 8 months before the group orphan photo was taken. Samuel now understood the horrifying truth. William Blackwood had refused to accept his son's death. Driven mad by grief and denial, he had used his fortune to create an elaborate deception. The asylum had been searching for orphan boys who resembled his dead son. When they found suitable candidates, they would present them to Blackwood for approval. The boys who did not meet his standards were eliminated to protect the secret. The boy in the 1902 photograph was the most successful candidate. He had convinced the grieving father that his son was somehow still alive. This orphan was forced to live in a secret wing of the asylum, hidden from the other children and staff. Periodically, he would be dressed in fine clothes and photographed to maintain Blackwood's delusion. The asylum director received substantial payments in exchange for managing this cruel charade. But how had the boy ended up in the group photograph with the other orphans? Samuel found the answer in Dr. Carlisle's personal journal from September 1902. The director had been concerned about a state inspection scheduled for that month. Inspectors would want to account for every child in the asylum. The boy living in the secret wing needed to be hidden in plain sight. So they dressed him in the standard orphan uniform and had him pose with the others for the official photograph. It was supposed to be a temporary deception, just long enough to pass the inspection. The plan might have worked perfectly except for one thing. William Blackwood's health had been declining throughout 1902. His obsession with his manufactured son had consumed him. He spent his days in his mansion, talking to the photographs as if they were real. His business associates and remaining family members tried to intervene, but he pushed them all away. On October 3, 1902, just weeks after the group photograph was taken, William Blackwood died of a heart attack. With Blackwood dead, the payments to the asylum stopped immediately. The boy who had been forced to play the role of Theodore. Blackwood no longer served any purpose. The asylum's records showed that John Smith, the name they had given him in their ledgers, died of pneumonia on October 27, 1902. He was buried in the asylum cemetery in an unmarked grave. No one attended his funeral. Dr. Carlisle destroyed most of the evidence of the conspiracy, but he kept the financial ledger and the photographs hidden away. Perhaps he thought they might be useful someday. Or perhaps he could not bring himself to completely erase what they had done. When he died in 1908, these documents were packed away with his other papers and forgotten. The real Theodore Blackwood had indeed died in 1899, just as the newspapers reported. His body was never recovered from the river, but he was gone. The boy in the photograph was someone else entirely. He was an orphan whose real name was lost to history. He had been chosen because his face could fool a desperate father. He had lived as a prisoner, forced to pretend to be someone he was not. When his usefulness ended, he was discarded. Samuel's discovery revealed more than just a case of mistaken identity. It exposed a conspiracy between a wealthy man's grief and an institution's greed. The asylum that claimed to protect society's most vulnerable children had instead exploited them in the cruelest way imaginable. They had used orphans as props in a theatrical performance designed to comfort a madman and line their own pockets. The other boys who had been auditioned and rejected had not died of natural causes. They had been murdered to keep the secret safe. Their deaths were recorded as illnesses, but they were victims of something far worse. They had been killed because their faces were not quite right, because they could not play the part convincingly enough. The boy who succeeded in fooling William Blackwood had survived longer, but his fate was equally tragic. He had spent nearly 3 years living a lie, knowing that his life depended on maintaining the illusion. He must have known that when Blackwood died, his own death would follow. The October 27th pneumonia that killed him was almost certainly not pneumonia at all. Samuel published his findings in a historical journal, complete with all the evidence he had uncovered. The story made headlines around the world. People were fascinated and horrified by the tale of the orphan who had been forced to impersonate a dead child. The photograph that had started it all became one of the most viewed images in the museum's digital collection. But for Samuel, the most haunting aspect was not the conspiracy itself. It was the boy's face in that 1902 photograph. While the other orphans stared blankly at the camera, this boy's expression was different. If you looked closely, you could see something in his eyes. It was not fear or sadness. It was resignation. He knew what he was and what would happen to him. He was a ghost before he died, a person erased before he was gone. The photograph that captured 20 orphans actually showed 19 orphans and 1 prisoner. The face that should not have been there was not a supernatural mystery. It was evidence of a very human crime. The boy had been there, had lived and breathed and suffered, but his story had been buried along with his body in that unmarked grave. History is full of such stories, tales that were never meant to be discovered. They hide in old photographs and forgotten documents, waiting for someone to notice that something is wrong. Sometimes it takes more than a century and modern technology to reveal the truth. Sometimes a face in a photograph can unlock a mystery that powerful people thought they had successfully hidden forever. The St. Jude's Asylum for the Forsaken continued operating for another 85 years after these events. How many other secrets died with the children in its care? How many other photographs contain faces that tell stories of exploitation and murder? We may never know the full extent of what happened behind those brick walls, but we know about this one boy. We know that he existed, that he suffered, and that he died because he had the misfortune of resembling a wealthy man's dead son. His real name is lost, but his face remains, captured forever in a photograph that was never supposed to reveal the truth. The digital scan that Samuel created ensured that this evidence would never be lost again. The boy whose life was stolen could not be saved, but his story could finally be told. The face that should not have been there became proof that he had been there, had mattered, had been real. This is how the past speaks to us, through small inconsistencies and impossible faces. This is how technology can serve justice, even when that justice comes more than a century too late. This is how one historian's routine day of scanning old photographs became the key to solving a mystery that had been hiding in plain sight for 118 years. If you found this story as unsettling as we did, be sure to like and subscribe for more tales that history tried to bury. And if you are still watching, tell us where you are from and what time it is. Knowing we are all discovering this together makes the past feel that much closer.